Nomiki show. Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki show.
Hello and welcome to the Nomiki show. It is Friday, May 27th. Femme Friday. As always, we love to bring you Femme Friday. It is a crowd pleaser, I've been told. It's exciting to me. I mean, I think a lot of you guys know that we decided to do Femme Friday because there is a gender imbalance, shocker, on the political side of YouTube, not just with hosts, shocker, but also with the audience. And knowing that our audience is so supportive and just many are incredible allies, we thought, why not introduce more conversation topics or thinkers and writers and activists that are not just men to our predominantly male audience. We can't fix that. That's something that, Google's got to work on because it is an issue of injustice. But in the meantime, we are just really grateful that Femme Fridays have been so successful and you guys are here to support us. All right. I have a couple of announcements to make because I'm a human being and our team is full of human beings. We are going to be taking a summer break, a well-needed summer break. I'm sure a lot of you need a summer break too, but not, we aren't going to be taking a break from work. As many of you know in the audience, I have been working on plenty of projects. This is an election year. There are primaries still in the works and some really heated general elections coming our way. I have so much on my plate with Matriarch. Matriarch is, of course, an organization that focuses on supporting and recruiting working class women to run for office at all levels, from local to Congress. So if you don't know them already, please check out Matriarch and support our slate of candidates. We are rolling out new candidates every day. It's very exciting to see these races in action. Go check out Matriarch organization. And aside from that, I also have, I've been working on a couple of documentary projects. One that is really, I would say, going into its final stage, which is the one on Puerto Rico. And so for those of you who have been supporting our work on Patreon and you want to continue to support our work, maybe not on the show this summer, but you want to support our efforts on the documentary, please let us know, because that is something, we are not funded by big companies, as you know. This has been a project that has been very grassroots, and it has taken place since Hurricane Maria. And we are definitely in the stage where the money needs to happen because editing is expensive and pulling archive footage is expensive, and taking trips to Puerto Rico and interviewing incredible activists like a group of abuelas that has become a very key part of this film. That costs money. We do it on a shoestring budget, and we have a great community there that supports us. But part of the story of Puerto Rico right now is the vast inequality and how so many millionaires and billionaires are moving there for tax breaks and, disaster capitalism, fire sales, and displacing so many people who've grown up there and making it completely unaffordable. And that's due to the unique status that Puerto Rico has with the United States as a colony. So, we can definitely give you updates along the way. There's a self-determination bill in Congress right now that is heating up. There are some negotiations with the other side, the statehooders, the Conservative Party, which is against the self-determination bill. We will give you updates on that. But I just want to let everybody know we are going to take a break this summer. And for patrons, we're so grateful to you. Please message us if you want to support these other projects. Messages for any reason, we will send you a message. And if you want to join us in supporting us in these projects, you can join us on patreon.com/the Nomiki show and just, write a little note and we'll reach out. We have an amazing show today, though. Let me run through our guest today. We're going to be talking about drugs. Drugs is the word today. Yes, drugs. That's it. Great way to end the season, I guess. I don't know if we call them seasons, but sure. Great way to end the season of TNS is to talk about drugs with women. Very excited. We have Zoe Cormier, who we have been trying to get for a while, had a lot of logistical issues and tech issues, but finally she's here. We're excited to have a conversation with her about psychedelics and just this brave new world of legalized psychedelics and how capital is really transforming how we understand psychedelics and how we take them and who's making money off of them, of course. And then later we have Maia Szalavitz, who's going to be joining us to talk about that war on drugs, you know, the long-term consequences of the war on drugs, really what, I guess, the effects that it's had on our society and the untold story of harm reduction. She just put a piece out on that, which we'll be talking about a little bit later. In the meantime, guys, speaking of drugs, wow, couldn't be a better segue. CBD is not a drug, but some people think it is. I talked to somebody recently. I was like, no, you don't get high off of CBD. There's no high. It's like the other side of it. It doesn't have THC. But I know that because I take CBD every day. I do it to calm my nerves. I do it to deal with aches and pains. I do it to help me sleep. I have everything from CBD joints. I have tinctures that help me sleep at night. I have gummies. I have gummies with melatonin in it. I have fudge. I could go down the list of all the products that I have, from Sunset Lake CBD, the only CBD that I've ever liked. I tried it before. I didn't get it. Their product's so great. It is quality. They have salves, which I put on my hands sometimes because I have like joint pain sometimes. They have lotions, that beautiful hemp lotion right up there, if you're looking on YouTube. If not, you can go check out their site at sunsetlakecbd.com. It's such a great aroma. I love that lotion. My parents use it. My aunt uses Sunset Lake CBD. Sunset Lake CBD was actually, I found out about it from the Majority Report, from the one and only Sam Cedar. It is a farmer-owned company that ships craft CBD products directly from their farm to your door, their farm in Vermont. It is an old Ben & Jerry's farm, and they decided to diversify and grow premium hemp there and really enhance the rural community in Vermont. They also create meaningful employment with a $15 minimum wage, and the employees own a majority of the company. On top of all that, they support independent media like our show, The Nomiki Show, The David Pakman Show, and The Majority Report. Go check out sunsetlakecbd.com and you will see lots of different products. They're always coming out with new products, really interesting products, great packaging, great customer service. I cannot rave enough about them, and I don't promote any brands really. But if you go there and you want to buy something, make sure to type in NOMI, N-O-M-I, and you will get 20% off of your entire order. Go to sunsetlakecbd.com, type in NOMI, N-O-M-I, and you will get 20% off of your entire order. Don't forget to do that, because I have family members who've been forgetting, and I had to yell at them, say, no, you need to put in NOMI and take that 20% off. Also, just let them know that you're learning about Sunset Lake CBD from the Nomiki Show. So anyways, we will be right back. We have a great show. The Nomiki Show. Zoe Cormier is an author, journalist, and science writer. Her first book, Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll, The Science of Hedonism and the Hedonism of Science, was published by Profile Books in 2014. She has a piece out right now in The Nation, part of the series that they're doing on basically the state of drugs. She has a piece in The Nation called The Brave New World of Legalized. Psychedelics is already here. And, there's a lot of conversation right now, Zoe, about psychedelics in like a really open way. I have a question, though. I mean, it happens so quickly, this public conversation. I'm not saying that people haven't been doing psychedelics for years and that the 60s and 70s were not, moments where our parents and in some cases grandparents were using psychedelics and it was much more public. But something in the last, since the war on drugs, in the last, say, 35 years, has rapidly transformed in the last decade. And what would you say led to this sort of public, the shame has been pulled away from doing psychedelics?
Yeah, that's a good question. And first of all, you are correct that it has happened very quickly. So I first started writing about psychedelics when I was researching for this book in 2012. So the first time I met David Nutt, for example, who's a very important British scientist who's really at the forefront of all of this, was in 2012. And, he and all of his colleagues were talking about the great legacy of these drugs, the flourishing of research that happened in the 1950s and the 1960s before the 1971 Controlled Substances Act, which made all of these drugs completely illegal and recognized as having no medical value. And that's the key part, is that they were recognized as being only harmful. So Roland Griffiths and other researchers at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, Charles Grob at UCLA, scientists across the world, all of them spoke to me about the great legacy of these drugs from, 70 years ago, and how much they hoped that they could bring them back into mainstream science, and they could bring them back into scientific repute, into a respectable status as having, being recognized as having some value. 5 years ago, Imperial College put out this huge study on what happens in the brain when you take LSD. That was a landmark study because people hadn't been given, healthy, normal human subjects really hadn't been dosed with psychedelics in decades. There had been some studies on people who had, say, terminal cancer. That started about 15 years ago. There were little bits and pieces, but that study on the brain scans was really enormous. But then since then, you're right, it has just exploded in the past 4 years, absolutely exploded. And it's, every single day. Every day now, even though I've been researching these things for 10 years, I have taken acid for Rolling Stone. I did that 5 years ago. Like, I've been in this a long time. Now, every day I get like 10 press releases from some new startups like, hey, Zoe, have you heard of psychedelic therapy? Would you like to see our patent portfolio? Like, no, I don't want to see your patent.
So it is related to money, because there's movement stuff, and then there's, once the movement starts rolling, capital comes in and says, oh, here's something that we need to ride.
They love
the forces. Who are the people? Are they like mom and pop shops? Are they, tech guys?
It's a huge cast of characters. There are some startups that I really respect, who are really conservative in what they're trying to do, and those tend to be run by people who have been interested in psychedelics for a very long time. So they're aware of the risks, because there's a lot more risks with these drugs than there are with, say, SSRIs or other pharmaceuticals. The liabilities are enormous, and we cannot underestimate the potential for these things to cause harm if people take them in unsafe circumstances, or if they are, say, predisposed to personality disorders, things like that. They can cause temporary psychosis. Nonetheless, the people who are interested in it now, yes, you have the old characters who've been in this for like 10 or 15 years who are being very measured in what they want to achieve. Primarily, you have, tech dudes, you've got billionaires, you've got right-wing characters, you've got crypto fans, you've got longevity freaks, you've got the Silicon Valley cohort. Lots of people who just see dollar signs and believe that these will be the next marijuana. And it drives me bananas when people describe psychedelics as the next marijuana. Magic mushrooms, for example, if you use them for depression, if you use them for anxiety and terminal cancer, it's not something you take every day. It's something you'll take maybe 2 or 3 times a year at the most. This isn't like a cannabis drug for epilepsy or for multiple sclerosis or for chronic pain. It's not something you're going to take every day, but everybody seems to think that this is going to be a huge gangbusters. And it's, we're actually already seeing some tanking in the stock market, because now people are realizing, these aren't things that we can prescribe to everybody, and they aren't suitable for everybody, and you won't take them every day. And maybe it's not going to be the cash cow that everybody thought. So there are a lot of rich people right now, in particular in the tech world, who are losing a lot of money, and I am not upset about that.
It is really bizarre, because I've microdosed before, and it's not, if you do it properly and it's measured, it's a light for me, it's been a light experience, but I've also done it with other people with their dosage, and it's not a light experience. And I've seen people, it's very hard to measure, as in, I think, a lot of different spaces, marijuana itself too. I mean, like, marijuana affects your daily. I mean, we can't sit here and say that these are not substances that alter reality in some way or form, or how we perceive our realities in some way or form. They're still drugs. It doesn't mean that they're bad for us, or, alcohol is not more dangerous. It's just different. I mean,
it's different. I mean,
we would be in denial if that were the case.
I mean, let's be clear. Every single drug is a double-edged sword. They all can harm as well as heal, from diamorphine, which also known as heroin, still used in hospitals for pain, to caffeine can cause, sugar is also, let's not forget, is also a drug. Every drug can heal as well as harm. And there is a risk right now with the grandstanding of a lot of the people who are promoting psychedelics, because when you're seeking to profit off of these things, you are going to be driven, just by the nature of capitalism, you're going to be driven to minimize the harms and inflate the benefits and exaggerate claims. And that's how capitalism works. I mean, all you have to do is look at the history of big pharma, look at the ways that the risks of SSRIs were minimized, look at the ways that the benefits were exaggerated. We're seeing the exact same thing right now with psychedelics, because that's how money works.
That's right. That's right. So
that's like water rolling downhill. And so, for example, there's a company called Compass. The couple in charge of that company, Katerina and George, they have come under a lot of fire for the past 5 years for some of their tactics with restrictive patents and aggressive contracts. And my position from the very beginning has been, if it wasn't them, it'd be somebody else, because this is how capitalism works. It's just water rolling downhill.
Is the model, if we were to compare legalizing cannabis to legalizing mushrooms, which in some states has recently happened, yes, you're not taking mushrooms every day, hopefully, but cannabis is more of a like people do smoke or take edibles or whatever every single day. So we see what's happening in California and other states like Ohio. There've been a lot of these conversations about how monopolies have swooped in and tried to overtake mom and pop businesses. Any sort of reparative work that could be done to communities where they've been ravaged by the war on drugs. In California, there are lobbying firms and consulting firms now that are trying to find people of color to lead their firms to skirt laws that, and same thing in New York, to skirt laws that say we have to make sure that there's a percentage of people of color, small independent cannabis companies that are still in existence. So they always find a way. Big money always finds a way to take control of an industry. Do we see something similar happening with psychedelics, specifically, I guess, with the legalization of mushrooms?
Yes, we are seeing that. So there are, in fact, I've just written a follow-up piece to this Nation cover story all about patents. So there are a few companies that have tried to put in some extremely restrictive patents. Namely, there's a company called Compass, which has come under a lot of fire. So most people don't know this, but they initially tried to patent psilocybin itself. So a method of manufacturing it synthetically.
Oh, interesting.
Which is extraordinary, because the method of making psilocybin synthetically was perfected by the chemist Albert Hofmann in 1958. So, it's very unfortunate that basically you need, in the pharmaceutical industry, you need to patent something in order to be able to raise revenue. You need to be able to say to your investors that you have something that is proprietary, that nobody else has. But
wait, can we pause for 1 second just so folks understand? So the alternative is, you can't patent a mushroom, right? Because mushrooms exist in the world.
You can try. And at the moment, we are seeing startups trying everything. At the patent office, the number of applications that they're getting for patents on synthetic psilocybin is just growing exponentially. And there are a lot of very naive companies that basically are trying their luck and are trying to patent everything. And unfortunately, the patent office, the patent examiners, they know a lot about chemistry, but psychedelics aren't necessarily their specialty. So they're out of their depth. And in order to be able to approve a patent, you have to look at what's called prior art. So you have to look through the literature of what has already been patented. The problem is that because psychedelics were illegal for 70 years, 50 years, that prior art does not exist in the patent office. Like there is a lot of literature in the underground in, for example, the works of Alexander Shulgin, the chemist, like that information does exist, but it doesn't exist easily in repositories that the patent office can access. So these patent offices are being asked to approve things and they don't have a library of information that they can look at. So there have been some extremely ridiculous patents that have been granted in the past few years. Like, for example, there was a patent that was granted on a DMT vape pen. If you go to raves, you will have seen those everywhere for the past 8 years. One scientist once told me that he was at a Spangle gig and there was a stronger smell of DMT coming from the dance floor than weed. But because the patent officers, are not ravers, they don't know that these things, that no self-respecting drug dealer right now doesn't even have, would leave DMT vapes off their menu. Yeah. So it's a sort of, it's a really unfortunate circumstance where the patent officers are being tasked with approving and looking through, an exponential number of patent applications right now. And a lot of these startups are slipping through the net and putting in these extremely aggressive and very ridiculous claims on these molecules. Now, the thing is that whether they get that patent approved or not, my drug dealers, I probably shouldn't say this, but I know lots of drug dealers that have synthetic psilocybin.
You're not in the country, let's just say that.
Yeah, I know lots of drug dealers that have synthetic psilocybin all the time. They know how to make it themselves. People will still be able to make synthetic psilocybin. They will still be able to grow mushrooms out in the big wide world. The issue is access for people who are not plugged into the counterculture, people who are not in the underground, people who are not hip. So, if you are in a retirement home, if you are mentally ill, if people who are not plugged in, the question is, how easy is it going to be for patients who really need these things for depression or anxiety or terminal cancer, whatever it is that they have, for them to be able to access them and also access them at fair prices? Because if we live in a world where people can only get LSD, for example, from a registered pharmaceutical company for $100 when I can get a tab for like $5, that's unjust.
And we're seeing that with cannabis. The beginning of legalization in California 10 years ago to today, it is mind-boggling to see how much the prices have gone up. Same thing in Colorado. I have a question. Why even do if you're not trying to patent something through doing synthetic psilocybin, why can't we just keep mushrooms? What's the point of making it synthetic?
That's a very good question, and I would ask the exact same thing. They would argue, and it's a fair argument, they would argue that quality control is important, that, so for example, if in a medical setting, you need something that's called GMP, good manufacturing practice. So say, for example, a pill of Tylenol, based on the serial number, the factory it came from, every single step in the supply chain that made it. So it's a safety issue in case there's contamination or if a batch goes wrong, you'll be able to trace it back and control it. Right. I get it. But for the average person who wants to take these things for a more quotidian reason than, just garden variety depression, say, compared to, major depressive disorder, why can't people just use regular mushrooms? That's a very good question. These things grow. Why can't we just grow them in hot houses, in aquariums, in controlled circumstances in the same way that weed is grown? And there's also a lot of psychedelic enthusiasts who would argue that what's the fabled entourage effect. So there's the idea that it's not just the psilocybin that affects you, but it's also a host of other chemicals in the mushroom around it that facilitate its ideal metabolism. And some mushrooms actually contain a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which is a chemical that slows down the digestion of the psilocybin. So that same chemical is found in the brew ayahuasca. So that's why it lasts so long. So there are quite a lot of people in the industry who don't think that synthetic psilocybin is what we should be giving to patients. I would say from experience, I have had synthetic psilocybin, and the benefit of it is you can control it, you can dose it, you can titrate it very easily. I have certainly had experiences in the past where I consumed mushrooms that were way too strong or way too weak, and I didn't know. So the advantage of the synthetic is that you know exactly how much you're taking. And it doesn't taste like evil. As the comedian Doug Stanhope says, psilocybin is the nastiest flavor in the world.
I kind of like it. What's wrong with you people? I like mushrooms. I don't understand. It just tastes like a mushroom.
I think, I would agree with Doug Stanhope, who says it is the most dark and evil flavor an angry God could come up with, because God doesn't want you rummaging around his jewelry box.
That's true. That's fair enough. So I must have, I'm a vegetarian, so maybe I'm just more like earthy in my flavors.
They don't taste like, portobello. And also, my sister is allergic to all mushrooms. Like, she can't eat portobello mushrooms. She can't eat culinary mushrooms. So if she was ever to desire psilocybin for something in the future, she would need the synthetic. So I do actually approve of the synthetic kind, but I don't think that it's what everybody needs. I think plenty of people will get along just fine with the mushrooms.
I mean, it makes sense, especially for people who are trying to, who are experiencing it, who are using psilocybin for medical reasons. I completely understand that. Before we wrap, I just want to touch on, just for a second, there's like a spiritual component too. I mean, there are people, especially in indigenous communities, who have used these plant medicines as tools to work with greater therapy, spiritual aspects of life. And there's also like a tourist industry that's kind of capitalizing off of that too. Yeah. But, at its purest sense, when you're talking about an indigenous community, which has rituals, and you really have to go through an entire process to prepare for the mushrooms. I know I've done this in many different ways. I've done it in a very spiritual way. I've done it with ceremony and hikes and intentions, and having somebody guide me that has been doing this for, decades and generations. And then I've done it where, I'm hanging out with some friends in the day and you have no idea what the dosage is, and very different experiences. What is the kind of narrative around that right now? I know that there's tension even internally with the spiritual community, let alone the outside.
And that tension is not new. She who does not know her history is condemned to repeat it. So we should remember that the first time a white person consumed magic mushrooms in a recorded sense, it was a banker named Gordon Wasson, and this was in 1957. And he did so in the Mazatec community of Mexico. And it was an elder wise woman in the tribe named Maria Sabina who he convinced to give them to her. Now, Gordon Wasson then wrote a cover story for Life magazine and became rich and famous after the experience. He became famous for introducing mushrooms to the West, which, by the way, is hilarious because Liberty Cap psychedelic mushrooms grow wild in Europe. They grow everywhere in the UK. But all recorded consumption of them prior to this was recorded as a poisoning. People didn't enjoy them. It was this tribe in Mexico where they were ritually consumed historically for thousands of years. What happened to Maria Sabina? She had her house burnt to the ground by her fellow villagers as punishment for sharing their secrets with this white intruder. He got rich and famous. And today we're seeing the exact same thing. We're seeing very little discussion of royalties being paid to indigenous tribes throughout Central and South America who have consumed these things for thousands of years. They're not being credited. They're not being acknowledged. They're not being paid. They're not being given any sort of, compensation or support in development in their economy or anything. And a bunch of white dudes in Silicon Valley are getting rich off of their knowledge. And it's history repeating itself.
I think it's a really great message to end on, folks. Remember your history. Capitalism is built off of other people's backs who've done the work. And that's exactly what capital did, as we said at the beginning. Like,
absolutely.
Suddenly, as soon as they realized there was a movement around this, they were like, how can we make money? Not looking back and seeing who really did the work, the groundwork, and understands this industry specifically.
Absolutely.
These are plant medicines. So very powerful and and I think like there is something about how they work with us as humans. Like, we are part of the planet. And I think, capitalism likes to kind of take us apart from Earth at its roots, but we are here part of this ecosystem. And that's what I really enjoyed about the ceremony. Was it really kind of weaved into the ceremony was understanding my role as part of the planet, good and bad. in conjunction with, with these plant medicines that have been here for thousands of years. Zoe, super fascinating. Go check out Zoe's work. She has been on this beat for a long time. In The Nation, I'm really happy that they did this special. It was really fascinating.
I love the cover art. So
Cool.
Got the magazine to show it.
We'll put it up on screen. We've done a few of these so far. The cover art's beautiful. The Nation did a great job. Go check out The Nation's special on the brave new world of legalized psychedelics is already here. Zoe Cormier, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. Oh, the drug war. Yes. I think for my entire life, what I'm talking about, America has had a drug war, and it has had extraordinary consequences. I don't need to tell you guys this, on so many aspects of society, enhancing inequality, injustice, police brutality, false criminal offenses, mass incarceration, and the privatization of all of these aspects. I don't have to tell you guys. We talk about this all the time on the show. But how does it die? What do we do about it? People are much more aware of the mistakes of the drug war in a way that maybe 10 years ago we weren't talking about this. Our next guest is going to talk about that. She has written a piece in The Nation called How the Drug War Dies. Maia Szalavitz is joining us today, and she is also she is a neuroscience journalist. That is something that is not common in my vocabulary, and a contributing opinion writer for the New York Times. Also the author of Undoing Drugs, The Untold History of Harm Reduction, which came out last year. Maia, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, I mean, this is such a big topic, and there are many elements to the drug war. But I just want to start off with the consciousness from the public about the failures of the drug war. Where are we now versus, say, like 10 years ago?
Well, I can just say this. 10 years ago, it was unthinkable that the president of the United States would mention harm reduction in the State of the Union, which happened this year. 10 years ago, there was very little legalization of marijuana. 20 years ago, there was none of that. And in the 80s and 90s, it was absolutely unthinkable that we would actually get to legalize marijuana, let alone psychedelics. It was unthinkable that we would have states decriminalizing possession of drugs, which just happened in Oregon.
Right. So when you say decriminalization, just for folks who may not be aware, what does decriminalization mean?
So decriminalization means that it is not a criminal offense to possess a personal use amount of a substance. Legalization involves not only decriminalization because it no longer is criminal to have it, but it's also no longer criminal to sell it. And a lot of people think that all legalization is like, Philip Morris fentanyl and crazy commercialization, but there are actually ways of legalization that regulate substances and that do it well.
So what are some examples of that? I think I live in New York State. We just legalized cannabis. There have been some laws to protect communities of color that have been unfairly and unjustly targeted during the drug war. But of course, the lobbyists come in and they find their loopholes and they're doing what they can. So in an ideal world, what does that look like?
Well, I think that you probably shouldn't be allowed to advertise any addictive product. I also think that each substance requires different regulations. Marijuana is one of the safest substances that we have, not harmless. Nothing is harmless. So regulations that might apply to cigarettes should not apply to marijuana, or regulations for alcohol or regulations for opioids. All of this needs to be done differently. It needs to be done precisely and needs to be aware of the context in which the regulation is taking place, because otherwise you'll just end up with continuing racist outcomes and classist outcomes the way we're seeing now.
Okay, so is there a state right now where there's been decriminalization, where they're doing it well or trying to do it well?
Well, Oregon has decriminalized possession of all substances. And really, the only reason to criminalize possession of substances is to stigmatize and oppress people who use them. And people are now, even the government is like, we need to destigmatize. And there's all these anti-stigma campaigns. But criminalization is an engine of stigma. Criminalization, the whole point is to make those people look bad so that other people won't do it. So, Oregon says, no, we are not going to do this. We are going to stop spending money putting people in cages, which only makes them worse and only makes everything else worse and spends a lot of money. And instead, we're going to provide treatment. Now, they have just started and they are just beginning to distribute the funding for that treatment. And since they started with a very low access to treatment, this is going to take a little while. And a lot of people are like, oh, this is failing because treatment isn't instantly available. Well, we have a terrible treatment system in this country. And if we simply pour money into what exists now, we will create a worse system. So what we have to do, and it takes time, you don't want to just hand out money and then, oh, look, decriminalization doesn't work because corruption.
Right.
But you're going to get criticized no matter what you do.
Okay, so you're going to get criticized. Let's look at the Democratic side right now, because there has been a lot of shift in how we, like you said, Biden even publicly talking about this is just like, this is a man who was part of the war on drugs, helped design the war on drugs, fought for the war on drugs, sometimes reverts back to the war on drugs when he's talking off script. But the administration, let's say, is much more conscious of where we are, at least in the center to the left in this world, and probably the majority of Americans, if we're going to not play politics. Is the rest of the Democratic Party, when you look at these state legislatures, when you look at the governors in Democratic states, and granted there aren't many Democratic state legislatures, so let's be clear, where they're decriminalizing, or maybe even in states where there are Republicans who've decriminalized, what are the kinds of conversations they're having?
So Oregon is the only one that has actually done it.
Okay.
There are conversations that are going on in several other states. I think Massachusetts. I am not sure which other ones right now, because unfortunately, the rise in crime that was associated with the pandemic has spurred a bit of a backlash against criminal justice reform in general. Okay. And so a lot of states that were sort of gung-ho, Washington, I believe, is considering it also, are kind of like, in a holding phase because of the ridiculous idea that if something changes, it must be the fault of decriminalization or of liberal prosecutors, even though the same thing changed in states with conservative governments, conservative prosecutors. Right. Like, this is a nationwide phenomenon. So to blame, San Francisco having more homeless people on the DA there is just ridiculous, given that this is a nationwide problem, and that crime rising has been a nationwide problem, although I might add it is nowhere near the state that we unfortunately experienced at the peak of the drug war in the 90s.
Right. And you hear it from Republicans all the time. It's in the cities, it's in the Democratic-led cities, because they don't want to take responsibility on their side for
I would also say Jacksonville has 3 times the level of murders that San Francisco does, and that's like a red city in a red state in Florida.
Interesting. I mean, these are great. Exactly, these are great points. So how do we? Okay, like let's game this out with a little bit of a power map. You have Republicans who are trying to double down on whatever fear city kind of language they want to put out there. We're not in the 80s and 90s anymore. As a New Yorker, I can tell you that, yes, there is a spike, and it's related to a lot of different issues. And, it's everything from subway pushing, which has nothing to do with drugs or guns or gangs, to, to slashings. Unfortunately, we had a mass shooting, but again, not gang related. None of this has to do with drugs. None of this has to do with drugs.
I think for a long time, crime drugs was a single word. And the reason I called my book Undoing Drugs is because drugs is a pretty useless concept. Alcohol is a drug. Caffeine is a drug. We don't call them drugs because they're legal. And so when you say someone does drugs, you usually think of somebody, injecting heroin or something like that, when all of us, almost all of us, probably 90% of the population does drugs every day, including caffeine, nicotine, alcohol.
Except for Mitt Romney, and he probably needs some.
Yes. He doesn't even use sugar.
I know. I'm like, this is why. Then something else takes the form of a drug, capitalism.
Yes.
Exactly. So, okay. So let's continue to game this out. If we want to end the war on drugs in, say, the next 10 years, just put that number out there. Because as much as Republicans are fighting and conservative Democrats like Eric Adams are fighting the reality through, their next rhetorical skill. I mean, it really does seem very rhetorical.
Although what's interesting, I would just like to say is that Adams is also, going around to marijuana dispensaries, and that in a tough on crime, any person you would have not, that just was anathema. Like there wouldn't be them, and it would be encouraging the children and sending the wrong message and all of this kind of stuff. So even the Republicans, they aren't they're certainly gung ho anti-crime. Right. But they are not as gung-ho about the drug war as they previously were. And even Trump signed some reform legislation. It was far from enough. But, he even said, recognized that this is a problem.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I've been thinking this too with Adams is we've legalized cannabis in New York State. The war on drugs, the base thing that you were all of this targeting was around marijuana possession or marijuana dealing. Okay, that's not an issue here anymore. Stop and frisk had to do with drugs. He wants to bring back stop and frisk for what? What are you stop and frisking? If you're going to use that as your argument, what are you controlling neighborhoods?
I think the point there would be for guns, which is a more valid thing. But again, we're going to have issues of disproportionate enforcement that will reinforce racism and cause problems. Meanwhile, there's better ways to deal with guns.
Exactly. And again, the crime isn't going up because of especially the more cannabis is legalized in particular. It's just not going to go up because people aren't going to be dealing that anymore. It doesn't mean, there aren't going to be minor actors.
We have to fix banking because right now, marijuana businesses cannot use banks because it's like a federal crime.
Right.
And so that can drive crime by having businesses that are doing business in all cash. Right. It's an invitation to robberies, and it's really stupid. And a lot of people have recognized this, and hopefully we will change it soon.
Do you think that the Biden administration is going to do something, maybe if he's elected for the next term?
I would hope so. I mean, it's really hard to say because he is really old-fashioned or slightly backwards on this issue. I think that his administration is a lot more enlightened and recognizes that this is an old issue. But one of the things that you said before, marijuana kind of has been the foundation of the drug war because it is the most commonly used substance. Mm-hmm. And ironically, it's the least harmful of the illegal drugs. So we can make some arguments about certain psychedelics. But the point is that when you legalize marijuana and the sky doesn't fall, that allows more reforms. Because as soon as we saw, numerous states legalizing marijuana, then we begin to see states wanting to legalize psychedelics. And we also see, if caging people for possession of marijuana doesn't treat marijuana addiction, then why would it treat heroin addiction? Right. So it just blows apart the entire premise because the whole thing was marijuana was a gateway to, if marijuana wasn't itself that bad, it was a gateway to all these horrible things. And so basically the population is seeing that they've been lied to and that this whole war on drugs thing has done harm. One of the things that I think has also sort of changed the dialogue is this idea of harm reduction, which is around our policies should be focused on stopping people from getting hurt rather than stopping them from getting high. And as soon as it's people that we as a society care about, such as white people, you end up with more liberal drug laws. And I mean, harm reduction sort of exploded as soon as the opioid crisis began, because all of a sudden it's our kids. And all of a sudden white parents are like, wait, locking up my kid, that's going to help? How?
Right.
And so all of a sudden, instead of being like, oh, we need all these kids in jail as an example, so my kids don't do it, it became very different. And so I think there's sort of a confluence of factors that have led to more openness to reform, ranging from the overdose crisis and opioids to marijuana legalization and the growing recognition that psychedelics may be helpful for some conditions.
It's interesting because they say white people, and I was thinking before you even said that, it's once the libertarian Republicans started to really push for this, their base being white people, of course. But, it is.
And to be fair to the libertarians, they were anti-drug war in the 80s. So just.
Yeah. but it's interesting because, they're anti-drug war. And then there's always been this balance. They still want to make money. And much of the way that capitalism is built is off the backs and blood, sweat and tears of people of color, right? Being exploited and worse. So, that's great for them to think that, but they still have this economic system that they live and die by, the free market, whatever they think that is, that exploits Black and brown communities who have been crushed by the drug war. So I never really bought it when I was, debating libertarians in high school debate club, because this was, so funny. These were like theoretical debates we debated for 15 years. Right. Then suddenly they became real. And I'm like, what? Wow, here I am again. I just said this the other day. I'm debating the guy I debated in high school, and now he's a writer for Reason Magazine, and I have a show. Same arguments.
What's interesting to me, though, is that in the early days of the fight for drug policy reform, there were a few libertarians and a few libertarian journalists who did remarkable work, and who did work about overcriminalization, SWAT teams, all of pain patients being harmed, a lot of stuff that even the left wasn't ready to touch at that time. So yes, there's all of those issues I agree with, but to be fair to people who have actually been decent allies in this particular issue, I just want to say.
So how is that brushed up against the Republican Party? Suddenly, I'm going to assume there's a younger element of the Republican Party, and then certain folks were convinced, we can make money off of this, like John Boehner. But there was sort of this tipping point where it went from being this niche libertarian issue of freedom to being more mainstream in the Republican Party, and of course that did impact. I mean, California didn't need Republicans. Oregon probably didn't need to have the Republican support, but the public became more informed on, as the Republicans went more on board. Democratic voters started to realize, this is much more acceptable to just discuss in public. Well, what was it? Was there some?
So there's sort of a confluence of things. One of the biggest influences on the left side was Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. And that basically said that drug policy is not about drugs. It's about locking up Black and brown people, because it's really good at doing that and really horrible at preventing addiction or treating addiction or reducing drug use or doing anything useful other than, which I wouldn't consider useful, but locking people up. So on the Democratic side, a lot of the Black leadership, with some notable exceptions, were very supportive of the drug war because they saw in their neighborhoods what was perceived to be devastation associated with drugs. Now, some of that was devastation associated with drugs, but a lot of it was devastation associated with drug enforcement. Mm-hmm. And so, but they thought this is the only thing we can do. There was this sort of universal consensus in the 80s and 90s that treatment doesn't work. The only thing to do is go hard against these people, and we got to clean up the streets and all of this stuff. And a lot of the Black leadership bought into this at the time because they didn't want to be seen. Anybody who was questioning that was pro-drug and therefore, wants to kill children or something. So that began to change after Michelle Alexander's New Jim Crow came out, because it was very clear from her reporting and just from a lot of work that other people had done that, this policy does not work. And we are supporting the oppression of our own people which, nobody wants to do. And so, but once Black church members and Black politicians began to realize that the drug war is racist fundamentally, then obviously they weren't going to support it. And then it also took away cover for white people and white politicians supporting it, because what you ended up with was like, well, Black people are saying this is racist, and Democrats did not want to support a racist policy. And so what ended up happening was there was a big move away from all of this harsh drug war rhetoric. Now, the opioid thing occurred at that same time. And also on the right, there were people like Chuck Colson, who was incarcerated, realized how lousy this is and how unrehabilitative it is, became a Christian. And he started, because he, had solid conservative credentials, conservatives listened to him. And they had always had the libertarian argument, it's expensive and, it's not working. But now the faith community was saying, both among Black churches and among white evangelicals, were saying that this is not good either. And so it became a matter of, we need to have mercy on these people, and doing, this is not the Christian thing to do. It's also not working and very expensive. So sort of across the board. I mean, also one factor that I should mention is that it was fundamentally very clearly not working, given the fact that we always have some drug crisis or another.
It's interesting because now you see there's obviously there's a proxy war in the Democratic Party right now, and the lines are in some cases very similar to the lines in terms of supporting police and crime reduction. But again, going back to, it's not about the drug war anymore. It's just about crime. I think in big cities across the country right now, whether it's Chicago or New York, Los Angeles, of course, Philadelphia, which has a horrible legacy of this, Boston, et cetera, there are conversations about from Black community members, especially elders, who are very concerned and are voting in some cases more conservative in that proxy war because they remember the 70s, 80s, and 90s. But one key factor that's missing there is it's not, if crime does feel like it's higher because you're being told that, it's not necessarily due to the drug war. It could be due to
this is the thing that drives me crazy, because when when crime goes up, it's always the fault of people trying to liberalize and bail reform and progressive prosecutors and marijuana legalization. When crime goes down, then the police and the tough prosecutors and all that stuff, that's what's working. So crime has gone up, and we have not had very much reform. We've certainly moved a long way since the 80s and 90s, but the reforms that we've seen, they're not places, those places are not worse than the places that are certainly still extremely tough. So what is going on is a societal wide phenomenon of escalating inequality in the context of a pandemic.
Exactly. And a lack of, basic support, mental health support, housing, quality jobs, fair wages, et cetera, et cetera. And
yeah, I mean, the housing thing is especially ridiculous because West Virginia has one of the highest rates of overdose in the country,
right,
and one of the lowest rates of homelessness. So if this is driven, people are arguing that, this homelessness now is driven by meth. Well, why isn't it happening in the cheaper places? It's because it's way more complicated than that. And a lot of it is driven by lack of housing. What's really frustrating is that we actually now know how to house some of the most previously seen as difficult to house people, and we just don't do it. Like, for example, there's been a 50% reduction in homelessness among veterans in the past, before the pandemic, basically. And that was largely due to a policy called Housing First. And it takes the quite sensible approach that if you don't demand people instantly change everything about their life, like totally becoming abstinent, following a curfew, not having guests, all of these kinds of things. If you basically treat people with dignity and respect as human beings with agency, they'll stay housed, and over time, housing does not cure addiction, but what it does is it allows people to have the resources to move towards recovery, to reduce their use, and sometimes to become abstinent. It's a really complicated problem, but you can house an enormous number of people if you just don't make the housing horrible.
100%. And we have it, clearly. It's not like we don't have a housing stock. I look around at empty towers all around my apartment building right now, and literally at night there's no lights on. And I know the New York Times has talked about that extensively, but these are just apartment units. There's plenty of housing available, and we have a surplus. They just keep building for whatever reason, tax breaks. I don't know what their goals are. Speculative market, but and there's a correlation too, because if people don't feel safe because the media is portraying a community as not being safe, even though on paper it's very safe, they're not going to move here too. So you're going to have this insane imbalance continuing in a speculative bubble that affects everybody, all the way down the line in terms of housing justice.
And I think what's really troubling to me is that the media very quickly falls into the "we must get tough" mode, and forgets all about the injustices they were just reporting on,
right,
and forgets about the fact that, look, we have data that shows what effectively treats addiction and what doesn't. And we really want to go back to that old stuff because you're panicking people. As a neuroscience journalist, as a science journalist, I cover these issues and look at the research around them. I don't just be like, I'm going to, talk to a police officer and get his opinion about, how meth affects people. I'm going to talk to a pharmacologist. I'm going to talk.
Also, the police officer probably lives in, a community outside of where he's patrolling, I assume.
Right. I'm going to talk to somebody who uses methamphetamine. I'm not going to, police are not experts in this, but we have sort of created this situation where, their word is received uncritically, and where people don't actually look at the data or talk to people with lived experience about why they're doing what they do. And that, is an enormous problem, because if you're trying to change someone's behavior, it's kind of a good idea to know why they're doing it.
That sounds like journalism, Maia. I don't know what world you're in now, but we don't do that anymore because it costs too much money and thinking. Maia Szalavitz, fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about, how we undo this war on drugs, how it dies. Go check out Maia's article in The Nation, How the Drug War Dies, and also her book, Undoing Drugs, which came out last year, right? 2021? Yes. I don't know what year it is. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for joining us, Maia. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Everybody else, thank you so much. Have a wonderful summer. We might tune in, have some breaking news, do a little thing here and there as I feel. We're very fluid here. We do what we feel like doing. But again, if you want to continue supporting the work over the summer, you want to go on pause, let us know. We're going to be doing a lot of work over the summer. Would really appreciate your support if you have that in your heart. It's a project that, these projects, there's a couple other ones, but these projects are time-consuming, expensive, and we have really dedicated teams of activists and, of course, on the ground who've been helping us do this one documentary around Puerto Rico, but also the team involved in advising it and putting it together and editing and filming. We're all doing it for, grassroots money right now. This is a grassroots film. So if you can contribute or continue to contribute as a patron, it will go to that over the summer. And I personally would say thank you, because flights are really expensive right now. And I just had to book something and I was like, whoa, that was so expensive. I can't believe this. This is insane. So the budget has gone up a little bit. In the meantime, everyone, have a wonderful summer. Get some rest if you can. Stay healthy if you can. Be safe. And as always, stay in solidarity.
The Nomiki Show. Yeah, We clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show.